We are live. Welcome back to the AI4India podcast, everyone. And today we have another exciting episode for you. Today we're speaking with Narayana Bhatt, CEO of LatLong, a location technology based company in Bangalore. Mr. Bhatta is an investor in technology startups and is on the board of directors of Sporty Trip Experiences. He has been a strategy and technology consultant for 2 decades and has worked extensively in the US and the UK. Besides his passion, obviously, for building great things and all things technology, he's also passionate about Samskrita and is a long-term volunteer with Samskrita Bharatiya. He also writes, and he has written about the hyperlocal economy and also about Samskrita poets. He holds an educational degree from IIT Bombay and a postgraduate degree from IIM Calcutta. So, welcome to the podcast, Mr. Bhatta. It's wonderful to have you here.
Thank you, sir. Pleasure
I
to
would
be.
love to have another conversation with you about poetry one day, but today we shall keep it to AI. So, just to start us off, it'd be great if you told us a bit more about the company. I love the name, by the way. I assume it's short form for latitude and longitude, but please correct me if I'm wrong on that one.
Absolutely. You're absolutely correct. It's a pleasure to be here. The company's name does stand for latitude, longitude, a coordinate pair which allows you to figure out what is a location, right? With the new DigiPin which has come up, it could be a new technology which allows us to have a slightly different way of locating resources. The company essentially is a maps platform. All of you would be familiar with Google Maps, which is the most dominant maps platform in the entire world, including in India. We would be a small competitor to Google, so to say. What we offer is our maps platform through two primary means. One is that we have a platform called the APIs. Anybody can go to API hub.latlong.ai and try out our maps APIs, and you get free credit to figure out. We'll get into how does a map API help one and so on as we go along in this conversation. And the second thing is we have a very unique app called Anuga, which is used by a number of companies in order to manage their field operations. Field operations could be surveys. Field operations could be holding going up somewhere, and you need to figure out whether it went up in the right place at the right time and so on. So these are the primary two things which we do. The third thing is something which we have just introduced, which is an insights platform, which today is primarily AI-led, which is quite exciting. And we'll get into each of these as we go along with you.
Yes, absolutely. I think that's very exciting, especially the dashboard. But before we get into the dashboard, like you said, you obviously mentioned how Aloka and Anuga are used. But could you show me, maybe give me some examples of how companies are using it? I've seen some great testimonials on your website from companies like TVS Motors and Swiggy. So could you just contextualize, what you were saying and give us examples of how this technology is being used?
Most certain. I'll start with the APIs. That's the simplest thing. You would have used any of the cab operators or Swiggy and so on, where you start typing and your location is known. So these APIs, in some of the platforms, not necessarily Swiggy or anything, but if you were to go to TVS Motors, website and start typing which is my nearest dealer, the entire platform from there on is led by LatLong's platform. It could be, if you call TVS Motors call center and say, look, I'm in Chengalpattu in Tamil Nadu, and can you tell me which is the nearest dealer? The call center fires API calls on us. So this is one set where you would be familiar with some of them as consumers. Businesses are also trying to figure out where is my customer, right? A bank could have several crores of addresses of customers. Unless they are geocoded, you don't really know where they are. So one of the biggest APIs which we operate or which we offer our customers is called geocoding API. And incidentally, this is one API. I would be remiss if I did not try to sell a little bit as the CEO. This is one API where IIT Kanpur did a study along with us and found that this API is more than 2x as accurate as Google Maps corresponding API. And this study was done about 2 years ago. And in the meanwhile, we have now moved significantly better, where our API is almost 4x as better as Google Maps, because we continue to improve the algorithm, we continue to focus on adding more data, etc. And we have been fortunate with the kind of decisions we have made there. Then When it comes to Anuga, I will give an example. One of the largest political consultancies in India, and anything large in Indian political context is most probably largest in the world also, uses Anuga for doing surveys. Survey could be about what candidate to put up, what people feel about a certain political party, and so on. So let's assume you're doing a survey. The complexity of the survey is that there is a lot of branching which is involved in questions. For example, you started asking me a question. Let's assume you asked me which party did I vote in the last election. Depending on the answer, yes or no, I ask you will ask me a different set of questions. You will ask me who did I vote for. If I say BJP, you will try to make sure it's indeed true. In which case, you will ask a different set of questions. What are my drivers and so on, right? So there is a huge amount of branching involved in any kind of survey. And we believe that our app handles this beautifully. And the second big issue which needs to be handled, which is true for any political consultancy, is that you really need an ability to handle network issues. We have always had network issues, even in our conversation when we got started, there were network issues on and so on. And imagine we are sitting in some of the largest cities. If a survey is happening in Sagar Taluk in Karnataka, in Shimoga district, the probability you will get great network is not very high. So our apps need to have that ability to deal with the network, both on the GPS side in order to capture the location, as well as on the network side in order to then be able to capture the voice surveys and so on. So political consultancies, banks, NBFCs use our apps quite extensively. The third thing you talked about is Aloka, which is primarily an insights platform. There are 6.5 lakh villages in this country, almost 5,000 cities in this country, in urban local bodies. Each of these have unique location attributes. So one of the largest pieces of work we do is again with the same political consultancy, where in one of the elections last year, they used us to figure out which 100 polling booths in a given city to target so that their vote share will increase by 4 or 5%, and hence they are able to win. So the demographics involved, then be able to market to them very effectively and so on. Because in any election, for example, Tamil Nadu elections will happen sometime next year. There are close to 68,000 polling booths. There is no point in focusing on all of them. Can you focus on 500 polling booths where you will get maximum bang for the buck, as the Americans would call it? That's really what Aloka is about. How do you become hyper local in your marketing, and how do you become hyper local in your distribution chain? Those are the two kinds of problem statements which Aloka tries to solve. So APIs have a different set of use cases, Anuga has a different set of use cases, and Aloka has a different set of use cases.
Got it. Thanks for clarifying that. I just want to touch upon 2 points here and ask questions about them. So you mentioned that political consultancies are already using your technology for surveys. Have you seen any use cases from the government side yet? Because I know there's been a national survey announced in the next couple of years. So I could see great synergy there with your technology. So have you guys done anything like that so far?
So we've never worked with the government agencies until now. We would love to work with them. It requires a certain different kind of ball game. Something like a census would mean the kind of balance sheet size one needs is immensely different from the kind we operate in at the moment. So we would love to work with the government. We have given a couple of proposals in different areas on what is possible, especially on the Aloka side and not necessarily on the survey side. But it does involve some survey. For example, there are some ideas on how we can work with MSMEs in order to help the government frame better policies and so on. Because one of the truisms, so to say, which we operate in is bird of a feather flock together, right? So if you set up a certain kind of MSME network in Coimbatore, Tirupur area for textile, everything textile related in terms of manufacturing, machinery for textile, all of that, you get an entire ecosystem and so on, right? Just as people living in a certain area need to have certain kind of income and so on. For example, if you're living in Kormangla second block in Bangalore, you need to have at least the ability to pay 50,000 rupees per square foot. Otherwise, you can't live there. Right? Similarly, on the manufacturing side or on services side, certain kinds of AI companies are set up far more in Bangalore than in let's say some other parts of the country for similar logical reasons.
Makes sense. Well, I hope if any policymakers are watching this, they take note. Moving on to another question I had, something you mentioned earlier in the conversation, you mentioned DigiPin. It's a fairly recent development. We're filming this in July. I think the white paper around that, I was reading it. I think that came out back in June, if I'm not mistaken. So, how is that? How have you been able to integrate your technology with that? And also, if you could just shed light on what DigiPin is for, someone who might not be aware.
So Digipin has two parts. Part one is giving you a location, which is an alphanumeric 10 character thing, so that hopefully in the future you don't necessarily need to either keep LatLong or keep a huge address. So if business, for example, is Swiggy, can have your Digipin, in which case it's easy for them to operate. The second part, which is a little more technical, is that it also rolls up very nicely, which means that as I reduce the number of characters, I start to look at areas involved. For example, the first, let's say 6 characters will tell me what area all of the digipins in the remaining 4 characters would be in, and so on, right? So rolling up houses, rolling up data about houses, rolling up data about offices, and so on becomes relatively simple. So these are two parts of the digipin. What LatLong has done, so Post Office Department has released the digipin, certain parts of the technology, as well as the white paper about it about 3.5, 4 weeks back. We have done some APIs on top of the digipin in order to allow you to convert your address to a digipin and vice versa, which are the primary needs which consumers as well as businesses will have to begin with, right? Later on, you can roll up and so on, which is more a business related idea, which can be done. This idea will take a while to, get integrated into businesses, because they need to now change their processes to focus on this. They would have written a lot of APIs which primarily focus on other kinds of technologies. There are other technologies, for example, Uber has something known as H3 index, while Google has something known as geohashes. A lot of companies use these. Moving away from these to Digipin, which is our own uniquely created thing, will take time as consumers also become aware. There will be teething challenges, but we are very excited to be one of the first guys to implement this and help companies to implement this, and super excited with what are the possibilities from a sovereign standpoint as well.
Absolutely. I think it's very interesting to hear how companies are really trying to integrate this technology, and I'm glad that you guys are kind of ahead of the curve on that. Just coming back, and I'd be remiss if I don't touch upon this and try to get a better understanding of this. So you mentioned, and I read as well about how your map API is 2x better than Google's, and you mentioned now over time you've been able to make it perhaps 3 or 4x times better. So can you explain how you guys have been able to achieve this, and on what metrics are you guys, better?
Great question. So this will need a little bit of understanding of maps, which is actually straightforward. It really goes back to basic geometry. That's all that maps are. Trigonometry, if you want to get a little more involved. But maps essentially comprise data of 3 kinds, right? Points, lines, and polygons. Points, simple example could be your own residence or your workplace. Lines literally are typically roads. They could be other things as well, but primarily roads. Polygons are areas, right? Now, connecting these and trying to figure out whether, for example, your residence belongs to a certain area in Gurugram or some other part of India involves APIs, involves complexity, which is really what maps platforms build in. Now, the second part of it is the data structures, how you capture them, how do you store them, and so on. And the third part is algorithms to access the data. Right? So this is essentially what a maps platform is all about in simple terms. One of the APIs, so one of the first questions which I used to get asked, because we are a very small company, reasonably nascent company, Google has a dominance in this area by a wide margin with respect to any other company in the world. Right? So one of the first questions I always get asked is, how good are you when compared to Google? And we always used to find it very difficult to answer this question because no data of Google exists in the official domain. Yes, there are some conversations somewhere saying Google has X number of points of interest and so on. But then how do you compare? And about 2.5, 3 years ago, we came up with this idea saying, look, there is an API called geocoding, which is essentially given an address string. I need to convert it into a location, which is latitude, longitude, coordinate. Now, how well I do it, in terms of as a benchmark, does tell me about how much data do I have, how good are the data structures, because I need to be able to deliver this very quickly, and how good are my algorithms. This is one specific API. A lot of other APIs exist, like auto-suggest and so on. So what we did was to say, okay, we'll take this API, and the good news is this API becomes comparable because we created at that time about roughly 5,000 address test bed. Not very few of those addresses were incidentally in my own database. At random, we created them, and we said we'll compare everyone against this test bed. Right? If I know the actual location of these 5,000 points. Now we have increased the test bed because we added more and more rural points. Now we have close to 8,000 points in the test bed, and I run the same API of everyone against this test bed. So the accuracy is actually inaccuracy in this case, right? So if I get it right, it's 0. If I don't get it right, I'm off by 100 meters, 1,000 meters, sometimes even several thousands of kilometers, which happens in the case of Google or any other platform based on how they are structured. And then we measured this, and at that time our error was about 700 meters, and Google was about 1,800 meters, which is why it's 2x of our accuracy is 2x, or their error is twice ours. Today we are closer to the 400-meter inaccuracy or accuracy, and Google has also improved obviously to about 1,400 meters. Another metric I can share with you, and Google is better at us than this, where we would like to be, is Google gets about, I think, 70% of the same test bed addresses within 100 meters. Today we get about 57%. We would like that to improve. So Google gets some data really bad, several hundreds of kilometers bad. We rarely get anything more than a few tens of kilometers bad, which is why our average is significantly lower than Google's. How did we do this would be a more important question to answer than this whole lecture on what it means.
I think that context was important. So thank you. But please go on.
Most welcome. So how did we do this? I think some 2-3 interesting things, right? One is we obviously don't have as much data as Google or any other platform for that matter, because all of us contribute all our data to Google and Apple and so on, right? So they all sit on a lot of data which is actually ours or individual consumers. What we do is to gather a massive amount of data from publicly available sources, especially government bodies. They all publish huge amount of information. So today we sit on more than 2 crore, 20 million points of interest. But more importantly, our algorithms are telescopic downwards. If you remember in school, we used to write all these things saying, we are in Andromeda galaxy. Within that, we are in this or Milky Way, and within that, we are in this particular galaxy. Now you telescopically think downwards. So if you can quickly get down to a specific area, like a pin code, or let's say Jayanagar in Bangalore, I need to now look for a smaller part of the address within this specific area. So the ability to get down to that is something which we have done quite well, telescopically downwards. This is something which which is intuitive, and that is what we've implemented. And the second thing which we have done is something which is tribal knowledge, right? In India, there is something known as schwa deletion, which happens. For example, karam, which is a Hindi word or a Sanskrit word, could be spelled in a few different ways in English, right? But it would all go back to the same Devanagari or Samskrita word, right? Narayana typically in northern India would be spelled without the last A, but it's exactly the same word. Badri Narayan remains the same irrespective of how you do it, how you pronounce it, and so on. And we have built all of this into our algorithms. We convert most place names into Devanagari so that the comparison becomes simpler, right? Jayanagar ko aap Jinagar likhiye, Jayanagar likhiye. In Bangalore, it will mean the same thing, and we convert them all into the same Devanagari so that it becomes effective to manage. And we have built a lot of other fascinating things in the algorithm. This is how we believe we have been able to get to as much, if not a better accuracy than most of the other platforms. And the data structures we use are intuitive and custom built for maps, because we don't do anything else, right? Whereas Google or anyone else does a lot of other things. Their search algorithms come from a slightly different, I would say, hereditary characteristic, because search for Google is inherent in the way they do it, not necessarily map search or a place search. Whereas for us, all we do is place search. So we believe that these are some of the things which have been unique to us, which maybe are helping us do a better job than most other platforms.
Well, I think you guys must be doing something right, because IIT Kanpur seems to agree with you. Just, one small thing, while, it got me thinking, you talk so passionately about, location technology and maps. What kind of motivated you to really, get into this space? Like, what opportunity did you see? And, what was really the thing that made you leave? You had a successful private sector career in the US and UK. You came back to Classes Technology company. So what was really the motivation?
So, first motivation is obviously to do something on one's own, right? As I think it was Mark, I don't remember, maybe it was Mark Twain who said, a ship is not built to be berthed in the harbor. So the idea of doing something on one's own is always very interesting. And some of you would be familiar with guide, used to have this Raju guide who always knew about what place, where, and so on, right? So I've always been fascinated about maps. I used to go to any place I would visit, the first thing I would do in the old-fashioned hotels would have these maps of places displayed at the counter, and you would pick them up to figure out where one needs to go and so on, right? Especially if you go as a tourist. So maps have always fascinated me, and it's all about geometry. So you put maps and mathematics together. You have two of my passions personally, and of my co-founder Rahul Singata, who was incidentally my colleague at Infosys as well. And this is something which we really are excited to do from a personal standpoint. And the fact that there are all these insights which are possible. How many people live in an area? What is the per capita income of Bangalore versus, let's say, Delhi? Why is it that Bangalore behaves in a certain way? Why is it that new companies, for example, a Swiggy or somebody, experiments first in an area like Bangalore or in a Gurugram rather than in Mumbai, for example? All of these have to do with maps or location, to be more precise. And then the second motivation is the fact that you have one platform which is largely a monopoly, right? They do a phenomenal job of it. But then over a period of time, 7 years ago, the maps were relatively free in terms of expenses. And now they are significantly more expensive than they need to be. No mobility platform today makes any kind of money. Nobody makes any kind of money. Be it any of the platforms you have, Ola, Uber, none of them make money for the simple reason that the map cost is ridiculously high for. Okay, we gathered this because we work with a couple of mobility platforms, and people, we are working with a unique mobility platform in Bangalore. They just launched about a few weeks back called Nagara Meter Auto and Taxi. They started to talk about it on social media now. And before that, we had worked with a couple of others where per ride, they would get about I think 2-3 rupees, and the maps cost itself was 6 rupees per ride or 10 rupees per ride, because they were, unless you get to a certain size. Even if you get to a certain size, the map expense itself is a rupee and a half. So there's no way you'll ever be able to pay the drivers or anybody else for that matter, right? So how will you ever make money? How will you even play for your own platform? How will you pay your own software engineers when the map cost itself is a significant part of whatever you can earn? And that has been the challenge in the mobility area. And this is true for all other areas. If you look at geocoding, I can operate at far lower than a third of the cost or price of the largest platform in the world. I mean, their pricing is in the public domain, and still be reasonably profitable or gross margin level. So this is the second motivation. And the third is, again, sovereign. How to build something which is built for India and built for the world. Because if we were able to deal with addresses in India, we can deal with addresses worldwide. And we have proven this because now my platform is live in 50 countries. One of our largest customers uses in about 35 or 36 countries live. And we have shown them that we can deal with Mexican addresses in Latin, we can deal with Middle Eastern countries and Arabic addresses, and we can deal with Southeast Asian addresses. So all sorts of geographies, we are very comfortable dealing with languages. We are dealing with Lipi, which is when you go right to left, left to right, all of that. So all of these are motivations for us to say we can do something quite exciting in this area.
That's fascinating stuff that you mentioned to me. I didn't actually realize how expensive it was to use Google's Map API for companies. So it's incredible that you guys are solving this. And I'm particularly interested in the mention of sovereignty that you said a couple of times, and we'll come back to that. For that, I just wanted to ask you, how have you been able to integrate AI into the functioning of your APIs and your other offerings? Could you just shed a bit more light, and then maybe we can come back to the discussion of sovereignty and the importance of India having its own sovereign foundational technologies and maybe even its own, sovereign data set.
So there are 3 ways in which AI gets used in our own case. The first one is what we started using right from the beginning, which is when this geocoding API is a great example, right? I spoke about converting it to Devanagari. And one of the APIs we started using was, incidentally, Sarvam's previous avatar. It used to be called AI4Bharat. And AI4Bharat out of IIT Madras, they had published a certain set of free APIs, and we were using them. They are AI APIs to convert from English to Devanagari and vice versa, in order to be able to compare. And this is something which we have been using, and quite effectively. Though we have had challenges in terms of performance and so on, but then this is something which we have been actively using. Second is in building the entire data pipeline, right? As I said, we go through several thousands of data sources in order to create our data set. So we need to be able to build a solid data pipeline which has inherent benchmarking, trying to figure out whether this data means the same and so on. Because at the end of the day, with a 25 to 30 member team, there's only so much we can do manually, right? So the data pipeline is the second part where AI is used quite heavily. And the last part, which is the new thing, which incidentally we announced at the AI4India conference about what 7 8 days back. We are launching Aloka on AI, which means that the trial was I spoke about political consultancy. But imagine having a platform where you just start typing, and this is what we showed, saying, look, I'm in this particular place in let's say Chengalpattu, which is in Tamil Nadu. Can you help me complete that address? Right? Okay, done. That is something which we showed. If you are a political consultancy and you want to say, look, I want to understand who won here in the last election, what were the polling booths, who won, how much vote share, and so on. Straightforward. In the same context, you can say, okay, now I want to focus on increasing my vote share. So how many 18 to 25-year-olds live here? Because now I want to say, I want to give a different message to them, right? So what is the percentage of 18 to 25? Okay, I give you a percentage, but then it's not very obvious if that percentage is more or less than that particular city, that particular assembly constituency, that particular state, that across the country and so on. So we give you comparisons. Then you may be a different kind. You might want to say, okay, I want to focus on 18 to 25-year-olds males or 18 to 25-year-old females. What do I do? Now, the same set of questions, you flip it around and say TG for any marketing company. I should be able to answer these questions, right? Because I have a certain new shampoo which I want to focus on 18 to 25-year-olds, or I have a new, let's say, Narayana Taila, which is an Ayurvedic product, which I want to focus on 60-plus-year-olds. Which part of Bangalore has more 60-plus-year-olds? So that I don't waste, because wastage is a huge issue in social media advertising, be it Meta, Google, any of these platforms. How do I minimize the wastage, right? And then I can say, okay, I know this, but do I know where gyms are? Because gym rats also will use massaging oil. Mahanarayan Taila could be one of those. So where are the gyms? So I can do it on interest-based marketing. So all of these in an AI platform is what we announced last week at the AI4India conference. So we showed a brief glimpse of this on a video, and we will be releasing this platform pretty soon for people to start testing in an alpha mode and hopefully move it through beta and then live mode in production. So we're very excited by the possibilities of this, where we bring the AI, the LLM part of it, and RAG and so on. On top of it, agentic AI is what we are building for this. And then finally, show the maps, show the tables, show the actual data and the links from where we have obtained this and so on. So very excited by the possibilities of what this can do in marketing in general.
I'm excited to see how it works out. I think it's very cool, and I'm glad that you guys announced it at the AI4India Summit. That's very exciting for all of us. Just we already talked quite a bit, but I don't want to end this conversation without talking about the importance of sovereignty in the AI space. And there's a lot of talk about, of course, whether we need our own LLM model, our own sovereign LLM model. But one thing that I think at least at AI4India that we've been believing for a long time is that we need our own India data set, in the sense that not only for the sake of sovereignty, but also just because as you've been solving, India has its own local issues. Like, the way you've been converting things into Devanagari, for example, to make it more understandable. There's so many challenges that need, that in Indian context to solve a problem for India. So can you talk a bit about the importance of, campaigns like Data Dan, or just, the public and private sector and even government, sharing their data sets more, widely, and how that helps, researchers and companies like yours and startups, build things that really, help Indians?
Great question. Right? So two parts to it. One is on the algorithm side. People like Sarvam and Bharat Jen are doing tremendous job in building LLMs for India, and they're really focused on it. They made some brilliant presentations at the AI4India conference about the summit about 10 days back or 8 days back. Now the focus there is that's not something which I'm an expert on. So I would try not to get into areas which I don't really have expertise in. The algorithmic part of it, which is focused on, let's say, the kind of work which we do, needs to be sovereign as well, because as you rightly pointed out, how do you understand the data is native to the way we think about it. Otherwise, you train it on a certain kind of data, it will have certain kinds of biases. Now, that brings us to the last part of what you talked about, which is what kind of data, how do we build this, and how do we even get access to this data? Fortunately, we have been operational for a few years, so we have several solid data sets. But then the kind of work which Shashi Alok are doing in Data Dan, so that many more startups can get access to data, because data is central to AI and ML, and these kinds of initiatives are critical. So one of the things we intend to do over the next few few weeks, because our focus has never been about how do we make data accessible. But then there are certain kinds of data, especially related to maps, which we can make accessible. So we do intend to make this data available on the Data Dawn project in a few weeks. It is just that we need to change the way we operate, because the data was not structured to be enabled for access by others. So we intend to do this. I would urge many more, both public units as well as the government. For example, government does a brilliant job on gov.data.gov, but can they make more and more data accessible? And private enterprises, for example, banks and so on, because they sit on huge amount of data which can enable other kinds of possibilities to come out. So Data Dawn is a great initiative. We intend to participate by providing some of our own data, and we look forward to, and we urge others also to do this.
Thank you so much. I think that's a glowing endorsement of Data Done, and it's not just words, it's actions as well. Thank you and your company for, I think what will be a very important data set and which will help many, many startups and researchers in this space. So thank you so much, and thank you for your time as well. It's been really fun speaking with you, and hopefully we will speak again soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure speaking.